You think you know who you are. You wake up, look in the mirror, recognize your face, recall your name, your job title, your history, and you assume that's you. That's the person you carry into every room, every conversation, every decision. But what if that version of yourself is only a character? What if it's just a mask you've been wearing so long? You forgot you were wearing it. Carl Jung didn't mince words when he said, "The persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself as well as others think one is." In other words, you're not necessarily who you believe you are. You're who you've been trained to appear to be. And that illusion, that polished version of you, is exactly where the danger begins. We build ourselves like fortresses, stone by stone, behavior by behavior, personality traits, beliefs, opinions, all layered over time until they harden into identity. But here's the truth. No one tells you, most of those layers weren't consciously chosen. They were responses, adaptations, masks we wore to be accepted, to survive, to be loved, to feel worthy. And eventually the mask becomes so convincing, even we believe it's our face. Think about it. How much of what you do every day comes from a place of authenticity? And how much is habit? How often do you say what you mean versus what's expected? How often do you act out of courage versus fear of rejection? Most people don't live. They perform. They perform the role they think others want to see. They perform kindness, confidence, even morality, not out of truth, but out of fear that being too real might cost them something. But beneath that mask, something stirs, something waits, a voice you silence, a part of you you hide even from yourself. That part is your shadow. And here's the twist. It's not evil, it's not broken, it's just exiled. Carl Jung called it the shadow, because it lives in the dark corners of your psyche, the parts you disown, the traits you've labeled unacceptable, rage, envy, arrogance, neediness, fear, all the parts you learned, somewhere along the way were wrong. So you buried them. You dressed up your insecurity as ambition, your jealousy as justice, your pain as perfection. But what's buried doesn't die. It waits, and eventually it shows up. Not directly, but in distorted ways. In the irritation you feel around a confident person. In the judgment you throw at someone who reminds you of everything you repress. In the sudden burst of anger that makes no sense at all. This is where the illusion becomes dangerous. Not because you have a shadow, but because you don't know you have one. You've buried it so deep, hidden it so well, that when it surfaces, you think it's someone else's fault. You lash out, you blame, you point fingers. But in truth you're at war with yourself. And that war is silent, invisible. But it poisons everything. Jung warned that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you will call it fate. Think about that. The thoughts you think are yours, the emotions you feel are spontaneous, the conflicts in your relationships, the decisions you regret, the voices in your head telling you you're not enough, they may not be conscious at all. They may be echoes from the basement of your mind, from a self you haven't met yet. And here's the moment of reckoning. If you don't pause, if you don't ask yourself, what am I not seeing in me? Then that hidden self will keep pulling strings in the background, quietly, relentlessly, making choices on your behalf, and you'll keep thinking it's just bad luck, or bad people, or bad timing. But it was you, or rather, the parts of you you never allowed to speak. So the question is not, who are you? The real question is, who are you underneath the version of you that you've always performed? And are you brave enough to find out? Have you ever found yourself inexplicably irritated by someone? Not because they harmed you, not because they wronged you, but simply because of who they are, how they act, or something in their tone, their confidence, their ease. You tell yourself, I just don't like people like that. But what if I told you it's not about them at all? What if the very thing that triggers you in others lives inside you? This is the beginning of shadow projection, and it's the trap most people never escape. Carl Jung taught us that we do not see others as they are. We see them as we are. And most dangerously, we see them through the filter of what we're still unwilling to accept about ourselves. What you reject in you, you will attack in others. The confident person you call arrogant, The assertive one you call rude. The emotionally open person you call weak. Look closer. Often what you hate in them is what you once had and were told to suppress, or what you secretly crave but feel too afraid to express. And so you project, not because you're evil, but because your shadow is tired of being silenced. You see, the shadow doesn't just hide in darkness. The shadow doesn't just hide in darkness. It manipulates from it. It whispers thoughts that feel like truth, but are really wounds in disguise. It decides who you trust, who you fear, who you envy, and you don't even notice, because projection feels real. It feels like insight, but it's distortion. You think you're being wise, you think you're being discerning, but sometimes, what you call your intuition is just an echo of a buried experience that was never healed. And here's where the danger deepens. Projection is addictive. It gives you a quick relief, a surge of moral superiority, a false sense of clarity. You think, they're the problem, not me. For a moment it feels good. Blame always does. It gives you something to fight against, something outside of yourself to focus on. But projection is a trap, because it never leads to peace, only a loop. You keep encountering the same kinds of people, the same conflicts, the same emotional storms, different faces, same story. Because it's not about them, it's about the unresolved parts of you trying to be heard through others. And the more you reject them, the louder they become. That's the curse of suppression. It doesn't make the emotion disappear, it just changes its shape, until suddenly, you don't recognize yourself anymore. You explode at the wrong person. You isolate when you crave connection. You sabotage the very thing you say you want. And you ask yourself, why do I keep doing this? The answer is simple, because what you refuse to own will end up owning you. You cannot outrun your shadow. You cannot suppress your rage, your envy, your insecurity, your guilt, without them turning into something more toxic, something unconscious, something uncontrollable. And here's the hardest part. No one can save you from it. Not your therapist, not your partner, not a book, not a quote, because as long as you believe the enemy is out there, you will never heal what's in here. And that's the tragedy Jung warned us about. Not that we have darkness, but that we lie to ourselves about it. We pretend we're only made of light. We hide behind morality, behind kindness, behind being nice. But inside, there's a storm raging. And the more you deny it, the more it leaks into your world through your relationships, your thoughts, your fears. You become haunted by your own reflection, and you don't even know it's yours. So the next time you judge someone harshly, pause. Ask yourself, what am I actually reacting to? Is it truly them, or is it something in me that I've left unexplored? Because the most dangerous behavior is not cruelty, it's blindness. Blindness to your own shadow. And until you're willing to face what you fear in yourself, you'll keep calling it by other names. Toxic friends, bad luck, unfair people. But in truth, it's you, looking at yourself from the outside in. And it's time you finally looked inward. There's a figure more dangerous than the liar, more destructive than the manipulator, and more blinding than the fool. It's the one who believes they're always right. They walk through the world cloaked in conviction, never questioning, never doubting, never looking inward. They are not aware of their shadow. In fact, they believe they don't have one. And that belief is precisely what makes them dangerous. Carl Jung warned us about this. He called it the inflation of the ego. It's when a person is so convinced of their own righteousness that they lose the capacity for self-reflection. They live in a castle of glass, mistaking their own reflection for the truth. Every disagreement becomes a personal attack. Every opposing view becomes a threat. Every mistake becomes someone else's fault. They don't learn. They accuse. They don't ask. They assume. They don't grow. They preach. This is what happens when the ego swells so large. It leaves no room for humility, no space for contradiction, no tolerance for being wrong. And when someone loses that, they don't become better. They become blind. This is the danger of the blind moralist. The person who thinks they are the judge of what is good and evil, never realizing they themselves are a mix of both. They criticize others for their flaws, while hiding from their own. They condemn weakness in others, while secretly fearing it in themselves. They don't realize that moral superiority is often just a disguise for pain, that outrage is sometimes a mask for insecurity, that the loudest judgments usually come from the most wounded places, but the inflated ego doesn't reflect. It projects, because to reflect would mean to admit, I could be wrong, and for the blind moralist, that is unthinkable. Admitting fault would threaten the very identity they've built, and so they double down, they build walls, they weaponize their values, they turn principles into swords, they become righteous not right, and that, Jung would say, is the beginning of inner collapse, because the higher you build your identity without shadow, the more brittle it becomes. One contradiction, and it starts to crack. One moment of vulnerability, and it begins to crumble. So they protect it at all costs, even if it means sacrificing relationships, compassion or truth, because if the image breaks, the person doesn't know who they are underneath it. This is the danger. We don't talk about goodness without introspection, kindness without self-honesty, morality without awareness. It creates people who punish in the name of virtue, who shame in the name of truth, who hurt others while telling themselves they're helping. And here's the paradox. The more someone clings to their moral identity, the harder it is for them to truly change. Because growth requires doubt. Evolution requires discomfort. Real wisdom begins with the words, maybe I was wrong. But the blind moralist never says that. They don't apologize. They don't soften. They don't examine their reactions. Because in their mind, the problem is always out there, never in here. And yet the most powerful transformation happens the moment you ask a terrifying question. What if it's me? What if my anger isn't justice, but projection? What if my judgment isn't clarity, but insecurity? What if my certainty isn't wisdom but fear? That question, it's not weakness, it's the beginning of awakening, because it opens the door to something the inflated ego can never reach: truth. Real truth. The kind that humbles you. The kind that heals, the kind that doesn't need to be right, just real. And once you taste that truth, you stop needing to be the smartest, the most enlightened, the most righteous. You just want to be honest, with yourself, with others, with life. So ask yourself, are you defending a truth, or are you defending an image? Because the image can't save you, the mask won't protect you, and the lie of moral superiority will only distance you from the very wholeness you crave. The shadow isn't your enemy. Pretending you don't have one is. There's a strange satisfaction in blame, a fleeting high, a sharp momentary peace. When you point the finger, when you say, it's them, it's always been them, you feel lighter, safer. The problem is outside you, after all, so you can rest. You don't have to question anything deeper. You don't have to trace the thread inward. You just exhale, and move on. But that feeling, that relief, it's a drug, and like any drug, it doesn't last. Blame is seductive because it gives you a story where you're always the victim, always the misunderstood, always the betrayed, the wounded, the one who tried so hard while others failed you. And yes, sometimes that story is true. People do hurt us. Life is unfair. But when the story becomes your default lens, when every conflict, every rejection, every discomfort automatically becomes someone else's fault, that's not reality anymore. That's projection. It's your shadow speaking in a voice you've learned to trust, and that voice will never lead you to healing. Because every time you blame, you shut a door that could have led inward, a door that could have asked, why did this hurt me so deeply? Why did this situation feel familiar? What wound did this reopen? But you don't go through that door. You slam it shut with a single sentence. They're just toxic. It's easier that way. Simpler, cleaner, but not truer. Because behind every strong emotional reaction is an invitation, an unhealed place, a memory still echoing. And if you don't answer it, it will come back, in different people, different places, the same patterns, again and again. That's the loop. That's the real danger of blame. It stops the cycle of growth, and keeps you circling the same emotional drain, mistaking motion for progress. You cut people off and call it self-respect. You lash out and call it honesty. You avoid accountability and call it boundaries. But underneath it all, You're just running. From yourself, from the part of you that's still raw, still scared, still learning how to say, "This hurts because I've been here before." Jung would say that the shadow has no interest in your peace, only your attention. It will sabotage your relationships, distort your worldview, and poison your self-worth, just to get you to stop and listen. And when you blame others instead, you silence that voice, but silencing it doesn't solve it. It just makes it louder in the dark, until one day, everything feels like an attack. Every word feels like a judgment. Every disagreement feels like rejection. Because when you avoid looking inside, everything outside becomes a mirror you want to shatter. That's not strength. That's exhaustion disguised as defense. Blame becomes your weapon, not just against others, but against yourself. Because the more you project, the more disconnected you become from others, from clarity, from reality, from truth. You start living in a world where no one understands you, where no one is safe, where every bond is a battlefield, and still you never think to turn the mirror around. But the truth is simple, brutal, freeing. What you can't hold inside, you throw at the world. Your unspoken grief becomes criticism, your shame becomes judgment, your fear becomes control, and your longing for connection becomes a fortress that no one can enter, not even you. Blame is not just a behavior, it's a symptom of wounds that never closed, of feelings never processed, of truths you weren't ready to face, and it will keep you stuck forever unless you stop and ask the question most people run from. What part of me is hurting beneath all this noise? Because healing doesn't begin with blaming the world. It begins with having the courage to whisper to yourself, maybe it was never just about them. Not all shadows are loud. Not all darkness looks like anger, cruelty, or hatred. Sometimes the most dangerous shadows wear halos. They speak softly. They quote healing books. They attend spiritual retreats. They meditate every morning and post about inner peace every night. But underneath that light, something's hiding. Carl Jung warned that the shadow adapts. It doesn't just dwell in pain. It can evolve. It can become clever, polished, even enlightened. And that's where it gets truly dangerous. Because the ego doesn't disappear just because you started working on yourself. No, sometimes it transforms. And it disguises itself as growth. This is what we now call spiritual narcissism. When your personal development becomes a new mask, a new identity, a new performance, you start believing you're above others. Because you've done the work, you see yourself as awake, while judging those who are still asleep. You speak about compassion, but only offer it to people who reflect your beliefs. You praise healing, but secretly resent those who haven't healed yet. And you don't see this as shadow, you see it as progress. But it isn't, because if your growth makes you feel superior instead of connected, it's not growth, it's ego, just painted in softer colors. This is the trap so few people talk about, that even your path to self-awareness can be hijacked by the very thing you're trying to outgrow. And the worst part, you think you've evolved, you think you've transcended, but really you've just decorated your cage. You've made your armor prettier, you've learned new words, new affirmations, new philosophies, but the wound inside is still untouched, still whispering, still hurting. And so the shadow evolves with you. It shows up in your condescending tone, in the way you explain your journey with subtle arrogance, in how you dismiss people who feel too much, move too slowly, or question your insight. It appears when you post about letting go, but haven't forgiven anyone. When you speak about acceptance, but still shame parts of yourself when no one's watching. When you praise self-love, but feel panic when you're truly alone. That's not transformation. That's spiritual bypassing. It's using the language of consciousness to avoid the raw, messy, uncomfortable truths about yourself. It's trading one mask for another, one identity for a newer, shinier one. And it keeps you stuck, because you think you've healed when in fact, you've only hidden deeper. And the shadow loves it, because now, no one can call it out. You've built a fortress around your pain using the very tools that were supposed to free you. But here's the thing. Jung understood that many still don't. True awareness isn't about becoming light. It's about holding your darkness without fear. It's about sitting with the parts of you that aren't pretty, the jealousy, the insecurity, the control, the craving to be seen, to be praised, to be chosen, all the things you judge in others, that still exist in you. And when you can say, yes, that's me too, not with shame, but with compassion, then and only then are you truly waking up, because awakening isn't loud, it's not a declaration, it's not a brand, it's not a caption, it's quiet, humble, uncomfortable, and real. So if your light comes with judgment, it's not light. If your healing needs applause, it's not healing. And if your transformation separates you from others instead of connecting you to them, then your shadow is still in control, just dressed in white robes and good intentions. The question is not, have you grown? The real question is, has your growth made you more honest or just more impressive? Because only one of those will set you free. There's a conversation happening inside you every day, but it's not with words. It's in the tightness in your chest, the clenching in your jaw, the weight behind your eyes. Your body is not just flesh and bone. It's memory, it's emotion, it's the last place your shadow hides when it has nowhere else to go. Carl Jung believed that what you refuse to make conscious doesn't disappear. It goes deeper, into the body, into the nervous system, into the posture you carry through life like a silent confession. You think you're just tired, but it's not just fatigue. It's emotional armor. You think your stomach knots from stress, but what if it's the fear you swallowed years ago and never digested? That lingering ache in your shoulders, maybe it's the burden of pretending to be okay for too long. The shadow isn't only psychological, it's physiological, because the body remembers everything the mind tries to forget. Every time you repress an emotion, anger, sadness, grief, jealousy, it doesn't vanish. It finds a home somewhere inside you, in your muscles, your breath, your heartbeat, and over time it begins to speak louder, first as discomfort, then tension, then if ignored long enough, pain. Have you ever noticed how you shrink in front of people who remind you of someone who once hurt you? How your spine curves inwards? How your eyes avoid theirs? How your voice softens? Not out of respect, but survival. That's not habit, that's the shadow, whispering through your posture. Have you ever caught yourself clenching your fists during a calm conversation, or grinding your teeth when no one's watching? That's not random, that's stored rage, trying to find a way out. And here's the tragedy. Most people treat the symptoms, not the source. They go to the doctor for back pain, but never ask what emotional weight they're carrying. They take pills for anxiety, but never ask what truth they've been running from. They practice deep breathing, not realizing they've been holding their breath for years, not just from tension but from fear of feeling something too deeply. This is not to say that all illness is emotional, but the line between body and mind is thinner than we think. And your shadow, it doesn't respect that line. When it can't speak through thought, it speaks through sensation. When it can't scream through emotion, it screams through exhaustion. And if you don't listen, it escalates. Insomnia, chronic fatigue, panic attacks, migraines, a body that feels like it's betraying you, but really it's trying to protect you, or warn you, or beg you to finally stop pretending, because the body never lies, and it never forgets. This is what makes the shadow so insidious. It doesn't just alter your perception, it invades your biology. It turns your nervous system into a battlefield. It convinces you that you're overreacting when you're actually overwhelmed, that you're too sensitive when you're actually wide open to pain no one else can see. And still you blame the body. You call it weak, you call it broken. But what if it's not weak? What if it's the strongest part of you? Because it's been carrying everything you refuse to feel. Carl Jung didn't separate the soul from the skin. He knew integration wasn't just a psychological act. It was somatic, physical, lived. There is no coming to consciousness without pain, he wrote. And sometimes that pain isn't metaphorical. It's in your spine, your breath, your blood pressure. So if your body has been speaking to you, listen. If something feels stuck, heavy, numb, ask yourself, what have I been holding in? What part of me have I silenced for too long? Because healing isn't just about mindset. It's about embodiment. It's about letting your body finally feel what your mind was too afraid to face. And when you do that, when you breathe into the pain, when you allow the tears, when you stop bracing for impact, you'll realize something profound. Your body was never your enemy. It was just the shadow's last message, asking to be heard. There's a moment in life, quiet, subtle, when you stop becoming and start defending who you think you are. You stop evolving and begin performing, not because you want to deceive anyone, but because the image you've built has become too precious to risk. The mask, once useful for protection, becomes your identity. You no longer wear it. It wears you. Carl Jung warned that the ego isn't inherently evil, but it is fragile. And the more tightly you cling to a version of yourself, the more threatened you become by anything that challenges it. You tell yourself, "This is just who I am," as if that's the end of the sentence. But what if it's not? What if that phrase, "it's just who I am," is actually the most elegant prison you've ever built? You see, the shadow doesn't always scream. Sometimes it speaks in absolutes, in phrases like, "I'm just brutally honest," when in truth you're hiding cruelty behind conviction. Or "I don't need anyone," when deep down you're terrified of being vulnerable. Or "I don't make mistakes," when the truth is, you can't bear to look at the wreckage you've left behind. That's not authenticity, that's rigidity. And rigidity is a symptom of a shadow you're too afraid to examine. Because here's the truth, when your identity becomes too narrow, everything that doesn't fit must be rejected, even when it's a part of you, especially when it's a part of you. So you split. You create a public self and a private ache, a version of you that smiles while another version silently collapses. And over time, the distance between who you are and who you pretend to be becomes unbearable. This is called moral dissonance, when your actions no longer align with the values you claim to live by. When your words sound right, but your body feels wrong. When you preach empathy but can't listen. When you ask for honesty but punish truth. When you demand respect while offering none. It's not hypocrisy in the conscious sense. It's shadow. You've told yourself one story for so long, you can't see how far you've drifted from it. And every reminder, every confrontation, every uncomfortable truth feels like an attack. So you double down. You isolate. You label others as toxic. You call discomfort betrayal. You surround yourself with people who won't challenge you. Because challenge feels like danger when your identity is brittle. But the danger isn't outside, it's within. When you can't say "I was wrong," you stop learning. When you can't say "I don't know," you stop growing. And when you can't admit that your current self might be incomplete, you stop evolving altogether. This is how the shadow wins, not with rage or chaos, but with silence, with stillness, with a slow, quiet narrowing of your inner world until nothing remains but the echo chamber of your own beliefs. And then comes the loneliness, the kind of loneliness that doesn't come from lack of people, but from lack of truth. You sit in rooms full of voices but feel invisible. You scroll past 1,000 faces but feel untouched, because deep down, you know no one can really see you, because you've hidden the parts that matter most. You've buried your curiosity, your flexibility, your wonder. In their place, you've installed certainty, pride, performance. But the heart does not beat to be right, it beats to be real. And if you're brave enough to loosen the grip on who you think you must be, you might finally discover who you've always been, beneath the fear, beneath the role, beneath the armor. Because the truest version of you is not rigid, it's fluid, it grows, it bends, it breaks and reforms. It dares to say, "Maybe I'm wrong," not as weakness, but as power, because only the courageous can change, and only those who change can become whole. If you want to meet your shadow, really meet it. Don't look in the mirror. Look into your relationships, because nothing reveals the parts of you that are still unhealed like love, like closeness, like intimacy. You can meditate for hours, journal every morning, read every spiritual book ever written, but none of it will expose your unconscious patterns like the moment someone truly sees you. And the moment they do, the war begins, not because they've done anything wrong, but because being seen, fully, nakedly, emotionally, activates something ancient inside you, a fear, a memory, a wound, and that's when your shadow steps in to protect you. Only it doesn't protect with gentleness, it protects with sabotage. You start arguing over small things, you become passive-aggressive, you withdraw, or worse, you punish, not because you're cruel, but because your shadow remembers a time when being vulnerable wasn't safe, and it will do anything, to stop that pain from happening again. Carl Jung warned us, the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But transformation doesn't always look like growth, sometimes it looks like destruction. And when the shadow is ignored, it turns your partner into your enemy, your reflection into your rival. You begin projecting what you can't accept in yourself. If you feel insecure, you accuse them of making you feel small. If you carry guilt, you accuse them of being unfair. If you feel inadequate, you convince yourself they're disappointed in you. Even if they've never said a word, you're not in a relationship anymore. You're reliving a story, one you never finished, one you never healed. You begin chasing closure in someone else, hoping they'll fix what someone long ago broke inside you. But here's the truth. No partner can heal a wound you pretend doesn't exist. No friend can fill a space you refuse to acknowledge. No love can reach a part of you you've locked away. And so you sabotage. You test people's loyalty. You pick fights to feel in control. You withdraw so they'll chase you. You become the villain in a story where all you ever wanted was to be loved. But love that triggers your shadow isn't the problem. It's the opportunity. Because what you do in that moment, when you feel exposed, scared, and triggered, defines whether you repeat your past or rewrite it. You can't be truly intimate with anyone if you're still at war with yourself. You can't trust others if you haven't learned to trust your own emotions. You can't receive love freely if you believe, deep down, that you're unworthy of it. That's not a relationship problem. That's a shadow problem. And here's the part most people never see coming. The more you avoid your inner wounds, the more you'll unconsciously seek out people who reopen them. Not because you're broken, but because your psyche wants resolution, closure, completion. But if you're not aware of that drive, you'll just keep bleeding on people who didn't cut you. You'll keep losing good people to bad patterns. You'll keep searching for safety in all the wrong places. So if your relationships feel like they're on repeat, if you keep finding yourself in the same emotional loops, pause. Ask yourself, am I loving this person, or fighting a ghost through them? Because your shadow doesn't just show up in solitude, it shows up in your tone, in your silence, in the way you reach for someone, then push them away, in the way you expect them to fix something they don't even know is broken. You say you want love, but your shadow wants safety, and sometimes, they're not the same thing. Real love requires vulnerability, but vulnerability is impossible when the shadow is unacknowledged. Because until you face what's buried, you'll keep confusing protection with connection, and you'll never feel seen. So here's the truth. Jung would have you face, until you love the parts of you you've hidden, no one else truly can. There's a cost to running from yourself, and it's not paid all at once. It's paid slowly, over time, through broken promises, abandoned dreams, ruined relationships, and the quiet realization that you no longer recognize the person in the mirror. You don't mean to become a stranger to yourself, no one does, but it starts with a small decision to look away, from the pain, from the pattern, from the memory that knocks in the middle of the night, but you refuse to open the door. You call it resilience, you call it strength, you say, I've moved on, but the truth is, you've just moved further from yourself. Carl Jung warned that what you resist, not only persists, but grows in size. And the longer you avoid your shadow, the more power it gathers. It doesn't disappear, it waits. It waits in your compulsions, your addictions, your outbursts, your silence. It waits behind every choice that feels like déjà vu, every heartbreak that feels like fate, every self-betrayal that feels familiar. And eventually, it takes over, not dramatically, quietly. You start saying things you don't mean, laughing at jokes that hurt, agreeing to things you hate. You become the version of yourself that pleases the room but drains your soul. You build routines that keep you numb. You surround yourself with people who reflect who you pretend to be, not who you are. And one day, you wake up with a life that looks functional, but feels hollow, because avoidance, over time, becomes identity. You start to think, this is just who I am, anxious, angry, unlucky in love, always betrayed, always tired, always searching. You build a narrative around the wound, and then defend it like it's sacred. But the truth, you haven't found yourself. You've just mastered the performance. You've crafted an image so polished, so practiced, that even you forget it's a mask. And beneath it, there's someone else, someone softer, someone scared, someone whose story never got told, someone who was shut down before they could ever speak their truth. But here's what Jung understood better than most. The psyche doesn't forget. Your shadow will always come back, and the more you suppress it, the louder it returns. Not as a whisper, but as sabotage. You'll cancel the opportunity you were praying for. You'll end the relationship just when it got real. You'll make a mistake so irrational, even you don't understand why. And then you'll say, I don't know what came over me, but something did. Something ancient, something wounded, something you refused to face. That's how the shadow wins. Not with a scream, but with a pattern, a loop, a quiet script that plays out in your decisions until your life becomes a reflection of your deepest fear, not your highest truth. And here's the cruelest part. The world often rewards you for this mask. It celebrates your success, it likes your photos, it praises your strength. No one sees the cost, no one knows what you buried to maintain the illusion. And so you keep going, smiling, performing, dying inside. But you feel it, in the moments of silence, in the late-night thoughts, in the sudden emotions that don't make sense. You feel the tension between who you are and who you've become. And that tension, it's not weakness, it's not depression, it's your truth, fighting to surface. So ask yourself, what have I refused to feel for so long, that I've mistaken numbness for peace? Because peace isn't the absence of pain, it's the presence of integration. And integration only begins when you stop running and start returning to yourself, to the part of you that's been left behind, to the shadow you've been told to fear, but which only wants to be seen. You cannot outrun what lives inside you. You can only meet it, and maybe, just maybe, that meeting will be the beginning of who you were always meant to be. So here you are, at the end of this path, or maybe, at the beginning of another. You've seen the shadow, not out there, but in here. Not in them, but in you. You felt its weight, not as evil, but as something human. Uncomfortable, yes, but not unworthy of love. And now, you're standing at the threshold of the only choice that truly matters. Will you keep running from the parts of you that hurt, or will you finally turn toward them and listen? Carl Jung never said to destroy the shadow. He never said to eliminate it, silence it, purify it. He said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. That's where transformation begins, not in escaping your darkness, but in embracing it. Because what you hide holds your power. That rage you hate, it's also your fire, your voice, your boundary. That envy, it's your compass, it points to what you desire, but don't believe you're allowed to have. That jealousy, it's your tenderness, asking not to be replaced. That sadness you never let surface, it's the doorway to your deepest truth. It softens you, it cleanses you, it makes you real. Integration means you stop labeling parts of yourself as wrong, or ugly, or too much. It means you welcome every emotion as a messenger, every reaction as information, every trigger as an opportunity. You stop editing your soul to fit the room. You stop rehearsing who you think you're supposed to be. You let yourself be messy, contradictory, beautiful in a way that has nothing to do with perfection. You become honest, and from that honesty comes wholeness. You see, wholeness doesn't mean you're always calm, always wise, always healed. Wholeness means you're not at war with yourself anymore. It means the parts of you you once exiled are now home. It means the shame has become compassion, the judgment has become curiosity, the silence has become voice. That's the real power, the quiet, grounded, unshakable power of someone who knows themselves, all of themselves. Because when you know your darkness, no one can use it against you. When you've faced your fears, they no longer control your decisions. When you've stopped pretending to be good, you finally become real. And when you become real, truly real, you stop needing to project, to perform, to protect an image that never brought you peace anyway. You begin to see others clearly, too. You no longer need them to validate your wounds. You no longer turn them into villains to justify your pain. You no longer chase love to prove you're worthy. You simply meet them, as they are, from where you are, without masks, without manipulation, without fear. And that right there, that's freedom. The kind that doesn't come from changing your circumstances, but from changing your relationship with yourself. So here's the invitation. Go inward. Not just when it's convenient, not just when it's easy, but especially when it's not. When the shame rises, don't run, sit with it. When the anger comes, don't numb it, hear what it has to say. When the sadness knocks, don't close the door, let it speak, because every part of you that you're avoiding is a part of you waiting to come home. And when you finally let it, you don't become perfect, you become whole, not someone who's above their shadow, but someone who walks with it. With eyes open, with a heart that no longer flinches, with a soul that no longer hides. This is the work Jung spoke of, not theoretical, not mystical, but deeply human. To stop being a stranger to yourself, to stop calling fate what is actually avoidance, to stop asking the world to love a version of you that you don't even believe in, and to finally say, this is me, all of me, and I'm ready to stop running. So now, the work begins, not in the video, but after, in the silence, in the stillness, in the decision to turn the light on, and walk into the basement of your mind, without fear, because the most dangerous behavior isn't darkness, it's pretending it doesn't exist, and the most powerful transformation is loving yourself anyway.